I'm Nina Champion, and I'm coming today from London. A bit cloudy London today.
And I'm Alison Liebling. I'm coming to you from a somewhat sunny but still cold Cambridge. And we believe the
The
future
future is
is
human.
human. So today we're really delighted to welcome Dr. Sarah Lewis, who's based in the UK, to share insights and ideas. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah.
Absolute pleasure to be here.
So I'll start just by asking, how are you feeling today? How are you arriving at this call?
Yeah, I've waited all day for it, so I've been really excited. Every time I've spoken to someone on the call, I've said, "Oh, I've got this amazing session happening." So yeah, really excited, really grateful to reconnect with you, Alison, and see you again, Nina. So yeah, really happy, really excited about our conversation. Yeah.
That's great. Can you start by telling us a bit about yourself as a human? When do you feel most alive, or which aspect of you is most human? That's 3 questions.
Okay. Who am I as a human? So I am a mum. I am I'm obviously a daughter, but also I've got a sister, so I'm a sister as well. And with that, I'm also, I guess, identify as a prison reformer or a criminologist, I would say. So I would say that I love people. I love stories particularly, and I feel most alive when I see people grow, or when I see the impact of maybe our work, or the work of others within this space, because it's just sometimes a really dark space. So when we see this kind of light, and when we see, even if it's just fleeting for a moment in time, it gives me hope in the future. So that would be when I feel most alive. Have I answered every question there?
Yeah, well, we said which aspect of you is most human, but I guess you've said that in a way, mum, daughter, sister.
Yeah, I think so. I think and maybe a lot more reflection on that over the last kind of year, really. I've always been very kind of quite consumed by prison reform and quite engulfed by it. But I think in the last kind of 6 months, lots of things have changed, and my health has changed a little bit over the last kind of 6 months, and it's put things in perspective a bit. So yeah, very much starting from that position first, and then the work that I do.
Yeah, you need to be human as a prison reformer, however passionate as well.
That's it.
Wonderful. Can you describe your work and your organisation briefly? What's it all about?
Yeah, so our mission is to support global culture change. We are a community interest company. I'm the CEO of it, and it's called Grow, Transform, Belong. We are a small, passionate group of people who have got lived experience, whether that is around working in prisons, working in probation, but also experiences of living in prisons, or living in the care system, or a range of diverse experiences. So we pull that all together to kind of create this shared mission. In terms of the work we do, we very much in the last kind of 2 years focused on the more system design work. So we do a lot of training with leaders. I do a lot of growth supervision with leaders, so creating space for them to make sense of their prisons, their lives, them as holistic humans, but also how we can design humanity into these processes. So how might we change processes, procedures, policies? How might we make them shame sensitive or trauma informed? How we might co-create everything, essentially. So co-creation, a massive passion for co-creation. So we co-create programs that we deliver to those in prison, but we also co-create training. Everything that we do is very much focused on that. So we have a kind of set of key principles of growth, which I guess I made sense of when I went to Norway for 3 years and did some work there about culture change. So we kind of live by those. But yeah, we work in England. I'm currently also working in Serbia, Albania, Georgia, and we also have done work in kind of Hong Kong, Middle East, Romania, North Macedonia. So yeah, we work really broadly, widely, with lots of different cultures and lots of different missions. But yeah, the main goal is everything's got to lead back to culture change. Everything's got to inform that mission.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Mm.
Just wanted to pick up quickly on the co-creation piece as a sort of a human experience, and whether you can just give us some examples of, you know, of co-creation that you've done and what you've learned through co-creation, and what value it brings, and as a sort of a human experience, and making those processes more human by starting from a kind of co-creation background.
Yeah, I mean, I can't ever imagine any other way than doing co-creation. I think that the biggest one for me was Norway. So I went over to Norway. I still had pretty young children. I went and did field work for quite a long period of time in 3 different prisons. But my first trip was to Bastoy prison, and we were basically going to capture appreciative inquiry, really capture the values and the qualities of culture there, and why it brings about a more humane environment, but how it helps people grow. So human flourishing, not desistance or recidivism or anything like that, but how do we grow people in this space? And we took photographs, but I didn't really understand really what I was going to do in terms of methodology, how it was going to happen. I didn't know Norwegian. So I had 2 guys that lived in the prison. I had 2 staff, and we just co-created it. And it was just wonderful. They helped me practically, they helped me emotionally. We're still in touch. But that richness that you get from looking at co-creation at every stage of a research journey, I think is just gold dust. And you know, done very much developed that further through peer researchers in prison. So we did a really great project in gambling culture with the Howard League, and we had peer researchers that interviewed people on the wings about gambling harms. I would never have got that data ever as a white middle class middle-aged woman. Just wouldn't have got it. Whereas Elliot was just brilliant in terms of being able to create a safe space where people could talk about some of the challenges they're facing in prison around gambling harm. So yeah, I'm sold on it. I love it. I've learned so much from it. It's humbling, it's exciting, it's confronting, it's brilliant.
Love that. And on that note, we invited you to bring an object that represents a moment of humanness in your work. I'm intrigued to know what it is. If you can, show us what you brought along and why.
So this is my little creature. This is my little creature. So when I went to Halden prison, I did 8 weeks field work there, and I met this really tall, I just remember him being just a really tall Norwegian guy who was working in the workshops, and he was making these like not mass production, but he was making these to sell in their shop in the community. And I said to him how much I loved him, and he hated these rabbits. He was just like, I hate these rabbits. These rabbits are just horrific. And I said, can I borrow one? Because I want to take some pictures of them in the forest. I wanted to put them out and take some pictures as part of one of the photo essays I was doing. So I took this rabbit, which was his rabbit that he was working on. And as I took the photo, it fell over and the ear fell off it. And I had to go back to this massive man and go, I ruined your rabbit. I'm so sorry. And he's just like, I don't care about these rabbits anyway. But on my last day, we put all of the photos and all of the captions in the kind of multi-faith room, which is the most beautiful space, really calm, peace, quietful space. And everyone was looking at these photos and getting quite just feeling hopeful and appreciative and grateful. And with that came out a present, and he'd finished it, but he put a little plaster, I don't know if you can see, a little plaster on the ear, and he gave it odd socks, which was what I was known for, to have these kind of always have odd socks on because I never match my socks. So yeah, it's been broken, I think 3 times. I think it's been dropped and then we had to put it back together. But do you know what? It just represents so much, doesn't it, that sometimes we fall apart and sometimes we break and we get put back together, but we still kind of maintain just this absolute joy. He gives me so much joy just in terms of that relationship that was quite fleeting. And we didn't know each other that much, but it was just lovely how he realized how much I love this little creature and made it something special for me. So yeah, very humane but beautiful.
Love that. Absolutely, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. And I love what you were saying just then about, the multi-faith room and the space and the environment, but also kind of, and what you said earlier about developing those safe spaces with co-creation. And it kind of leads on to my next question, which is around kind of drawing on your experience. What are the kind of environments and the relationships that best support this humanness? And you talked earlier about human flourishing. So what are the environments and relationships that really promote that kind of humanness and human flourishing from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, the principle of normality comes, as a first initial kind of response, really, like creating normal environments. We support normal behavior. We allow people the space. That's why there's something for me about going to the chapel or going to the library in a prison. If you just need a little bit of space just to feel human, like you're in a normal place and not a place that just has got a completely different rule book that is pretty hard sometimes. But I think, I don't know, there's something certainly in terms of, we go into some of the kind of darker places now, and for me, that human connection, it's getting people out of that space. And we do a lot of stuff around disruption, and essentially I kind of look at organizational therapy in a way. It's this idea that we get people out of that environment that actually you can kind of taste trauma in the walls or smell it, or there's just something, I'm sure Alison can resonate, that there's just something about the feel of the place that if we can get people out of it, they gain that perspective a little bit more. They're able to be an eagle that's looking above it, rather than this bear that's just in it and can't see the wood from the trees, and can't get that perspective psychologically, because it is such an oppressive space sometimes. So we take people out to Norway, but we also take people to Northern Ireland, or literally just move them to a different place just so that they can not have anything familiar around, and so therefore focus on each other and focus on knowing each other and seeing each other. And we spend a lot of time just getting to know people as if they didn't know each other at all, because a lot of the time this reactive culture, just, we don't look up and we don't see people. And that's what Norway taught me. We need to see people if we're going to change really anything. So that environment, the more everyday it is, the more different it is. Even the weather, it's just changes things. And if we can have lots of different kinds of people and lots of diversity in the room, then that just makes it even more kind of magic.
It's so interesting that you talk about how hard you have to work for a space to be ordinary. And yet it's the ordinary where a lot of these kind of human processes can flourish. And so you're telling a really interesting story of the really hard work but boulder up a hill to do something that actually is quite instinctive and natural in a lot of circumstances. That's really interesting.
Even smiles, right? Even just a smile, or just knowing someone's name, or remembering a detail about someone, or it's the small things, like it all adds up, but ultimately it's these small things that keep people going.
Yeah.
You talked earlier about growth supervision. I just wanted to come back to that, about kind of what that process involves, and how people resonate with this idea of growth. And because I've not heard that term before, so it'd be great.
So growing up in probation, we always had some kind of supervision, because we were working with lots of stuff in exactly the same way that the prison do, even more so. And so it's really evolved over time. But what we've recently looked at doing is very much looking at creating away days. So that's that disruption piece, creating away days where people can really just think about relational practice, really think about connection, hope, belonging, how we might engineer belonging, all these kind of key things really that seem to be that sometimes are lacking, or we don't maybe attend to. So the basics, I guess, around relationships. But in order to do that, I meet with every senior leader that's going to be on that away day, and I just literally spend some time building a relationship with them and a connection with them, and find out what inspires them, why they join the service, what they need right now, what do we need to talk about, what conversations do we need to have that are going to make you feel like this day is worth something, because time is just so valuable, isn't it? And there's so much time wasted in prison. and people are really tired, so they don't need any more time wasted, right? So there's something about that. And then as a result of that, we then offer a number of prisons growth supervision. So that's one-to-one work. It's very appreciative. It's about what are your hopes? What are you grateful for? What have you achieved this month? What would you like to achieve next month? But also giving them a number of activities around, you know, it may be around imposter syndrome, or it may be around their values, or it may be about their authentic voice, or it may be around, you know, how they want to communicate or what challenges they're facing, and that kind of post-traumatic growth piece. So when things go wrong, how can we make sense of that? How can we understand what we value as a result of that adversity, really? So it's very much co-created with the person that we're doing it with. We do it in a number of prisons. I currently deliver it to 17 governing governors across the service.
Wow.
And sometimes it's just a space where they can just offload, and a space that doesn't, if no matter what they say to me, it's not going to impact their progression or how they're thought of or anything like that. It's just a really safe space for them to make sense of themselves, really, on their terms. So yeah, it's evolved a lot from the way in which we originally did it, but yeah, it's that very much that kind of co-creation piece about how we connect people up. Yeah. So,
Absolutely. I want to just touch on sort of the other aspect of your work that you're doing, which is the very sort of future focused work with Justice 2.0 that you're doing, and ask you, if you had a magic wand, as we all want, and we had this sort of transformed human sort of justice system, what would be happening? What would it look, and what would it feel like? What would it sound like for you?
I think there's just something about honesty. I think, and I don't mean that people are dishonest, but I think there is so much, you know, Justice 2.0 is about how do we upgrade justice to make it more compassionate and human, and, you know, research driven and trusting, and all with trust, which is a bit of a steal off you, Alison. But ultimately, this idea that we deserve an upgrade. People, wherever you are, victims, you know, people that have committed for crime, staff leaders deserve an upgrade. But 1.0 are the harmful stuff. That's Justice 1.0 is the stuff that's unsociable and the stuff that, you know, we want to let go of, and we want to make it more unpalatable, essentially, like smoking on a plane, right? Like you would never smoke on a plane because it's just not cool. But we want to make some of these practices that are inhumane certainly like that, and that's through the kind of education piece. So I don't know, the magic one for me is the honesty is part of reconciliation, isn't it? And part of healing is that we got to admit what's actually going on. And I think we just seem to, for me at the moment, shame bash leaders in prisons, giving them UNs, giving them low scores, which, you know, represents the state of play, you know, no doubt there. But, you know, without any acknowledgement that the rules of this game that we've created are not ethical and are morally bankrupt at worst, you know. And they are doing the best with the resources they have, and they're protecting themselves, and they're surviving on a day-to-day basis, and there is no acknowledgement of that. And so for me, the magic wand would literally be, it's a bit like the Barbie movie, you know, where she suddenly does her kind of feminist speech, and then everyone's like, oh yeah, sexism is wrong. It's just like, I just want to wake people up to and do that in a very psychologically safe way, because I would hate, you know, I imagine that would be really confronting, but just to have honest conversations about, instead of dealing with the collateral damage of bad culture, really just thinking about, okay, let's honestly talk about toxic masculinity, let's honestly talk about racism, let's have these difficult conversations and hold people in these spaces so we can co-create the solutions together. If I could get buy-in on that, I would be, that would just that readiness, the readiness to do that, and we can sort the rest out. But it's just that readiness piece, the acknowledgement that we're hurting people, and that's not just the people that live in prison. We're hurting our staff, we're hurting our leaders, and it's just not on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm so tempted to join in. I'm trying to behave and let Nina ask her questions.
No, you go for it, Alison.
Is so resonant. It's just, it feels like this is what my whole book's about. But also, it's where I look now I don't know whether you know the podcast On Being.
I've heard of it, but I have never seen it, or I've never listened to it.
I'm going to send you, after we've finished, I'm going to send you the latest blog from that podcast, which is more or less, it uses the words you've just used. We're hurting, like we're all, and this is outside criminal justice. So obviously what goes on in criminal justice is often a reflection of social forces around us. And the woman who runs this On Being podcast, Krista Tippett, has almost used the same words. I'm hurting, you're hurting, we're all hurting. How do we do this better? And it's all about being human and being given permission to be human and being honest. So I will send it you afterwards.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
It's amazing.
And just sort of following on from what you were saying, Sarah, is, we're thinking about pockets of the future. So we're thinking about what things are happening in the current now that are like what you're talking about, like that kind of imagined more human system where there is that accountability, whereas there is that honesty that you've talked about. Where are you seeing that? Where are you seeing some of these sort of pockets of the future, whether that's in the UK or other countries that you're working in, that you've come across in your work and your experience?
I see it everywhere, which is the sad bit, really, isn't it? I see it. And I think ever since Norway, it had such a defining moment on me. When I worked in probation, I was working with offenders that were dangerous. You don't hug offenders, you don't disclose anything, la la la. And I came back from Bastoy and the other prisons, and was just like, they all talk about, you just need to think about what you see, and I was looking at exactly the same, having worked at Winchester Prison, going in there, and all I saw was harm, violence, difficulty, everything. And I went into Guy's Marsh, which was our first pilot site for the culture work. And all I could see was hope and pockets of magic and people, that stuff situated in people that, in spite of, and I use, maybe Swaleside as an example, in spite of the fact that staff are feeling unsafe and the men there are feeling unsafe and it's a really challenging environment, in spite of that, people still show up. And I just think that is just unbelievable. That is unbelievable in terms of resilience, that vulnerability, is something that is, really, really clear, but they still show up, and they still clock in, and they still draw those keys and walk onto that wing in spite of, and I just think that is, I think it's just how we look at things, isn't it? But I don't know. I think there's something about a classic example is I did a photo essay project of Guy's Marsh at the time of the inspection, and it pretty much got special measures back then. So it was a long time, it was a decade ago. And I did an appreciative inquiry at the same time, which was all about what are the things in this place that build growth. And we did an exhibition, and it was absolutely, you just look at it through a different lens, right? And it was like, right, this is what our community needs. If you just brighten these things up, which is exactly what we did. We didn't think about targets. We didn't think about self-harm reduction. We didn't think about any of that. We just said, let's just build normality and freedom and choice and meaning and purpose and all these things that every human needs and wants. And with that, we got a 4-point increase. And you just think, it wasn't rocket science. In that sense, it was just the core things that all of us resonate with. And I see it in everyone, even in the most challenging staff, who I've met some really challenging staff. And I just see, even if they're angry, I see that they care, right? Like, resistance is an opportunity. It's an opportunity where we can say, well, you're clearly cross about this. There must be something under all of this, even though it can come across as maybe quite hateful or judgmental or difficult or cynical. So I see it everywhere, and I think that's the only way I can cope with it. I think if I just, I think the minute you let go into that kind of dark sea, the ocean will just take you, and then with that, it's just I'd have to just stop doing what I'm doing, really. So I see it everywhere. The difficulty is it's not consistent, right? It's but even in the most poorest of places, there's a prison in Albania, Alademi, a women's prison that I worked with, the most incredibly resilient women in it, and we co-created a trauma program there. They had nothing. They had they had hardly any chairs. They didn't have any association rooms. They had a very small library where we sat, and yet they had no self-harm, and they had no and it was almost like they'd created a normality. They created, you know, they had the washing hangout, and they focused on relationships, and they had that was their only resource. But this narrative that we need more money, we absolutely, yeah, when there's water pouring into a roof, absolutely. But we need more compassion, and we need more time and space to breathe. But the minute you take people out of that space, even if they're really challenging behaviour, the minute you take them out and give them a space where they can feel safe to be brave and talk, it's there, it's all there. But
yeah,
you just get distracted by all the noise, right? There's just so much noise in a prison, not just the clanging of the doors, but the psychological noise of people protecting themselves, protecting each other.
Yeah.
Bonkers.
You're touching on this, but what do you think is getting in the way of a more human justice system? What are the things that most need to change? Again, it's a bit of a magic wand question.
Yeah, going back to the co-production piece, there is, you know, you talk about, I talk a lot about where's your resource. Like if we did a heat map, where's the hope? Where is the, you know, the really kind of hot spaces where we can draw on that hope and the energy that's in this space that's generally pretty dire. We've got so much resource behind a door. We've got so much resource that you kind of think, right, you are a prison community, whether you kind of like it or not. You are a prison community. There are people in prison that have been in prison a really long time with really good relational skills, with really good communication skills, and they know the answers to a lot of these problems, and they have a different perspective, right? Because they see the underworld that maybe we don't see. They see parts of it that they hide to us, and they don't, and we, you know, we mask stuff as well, right? So there's something for me about collaborative problem solving and saying, right, okay, we need to make this more humane, we need to make this more just, we need to build respect, build trust, whatever that looks like. And you've got all of that people that not only would contribute to the sustainable answer to that, but would be part of it. You know, like I've seen guys give at Grenfell, when the fires at Grenfell Tower happened. You saw guys give, literally they had nothing and they gave their tin of tuna in that box for Grenfell, and a message. They haven't got any food, miss, but here's a note. And it just had a note like, keep going, keep your heads up, you know, I'm really sorry that you've been through such a traumatic experience. You think there's just, people are very, very generous in light of the fact that they sometimes have very little, but they have time and they could be part of it. So yeah, that collaborative, this notion, or this assumption that they're not the solution, and that if they're the solution, we're not. And it doesn't have to be them or us, you know, it can be we. It's about we are human, we are all people. Let's just come together as humans. And when we do that, you know, we did an exhibition around loss, following one of our staff lost his brother to suicide. And as a community, we talked about loss, and people talked about losing their mums when they were in prison, and staff talked about, you know, miscarriages, you know, stuff that was tough, you know, but we just came in that moment. You wouldn't have known who the prisoners were, and you wouldn't have known who the staff were. And that's the stuff that's the magic. So even in adversity, we can connect, and we can grow.
That's brilliant. I don't know whether you've ever come across this Martin Buber. He's a theologian. I use him a lot, because what you've just described is what I now call the between, and that, you know, where we can grow a between, which is just human beings being human together and seeing each other whole, and, you know, getting rid of all of this projection. You're prisoners, we're, you know, experts, or whatever it is. That it's where the life force grows, and it feels like that's your experience, and you're describing it too. That's fantastic.
And you can feel it. You can feel it in a room. You can feel it in a prison. You know, people come back in and go, oh, it's got a different feel to the place. And that's it. And you know, we talk a lot about emergence and how we measure that and how we might capture that, but you know, part of me is just like, I think we just need to spend some time just making it, right? Yeah.
And you said you work across different countries. How do you go about this, and what value does it bring? What is special about branching out into these different places?
I love going abroad. I think there's just something really bizarre about going into a prison in another country that's a different language and meeting the same characters that you would meet on a landing. It's a bizarre it's a bizarre thing that makes me, from a human point of view, like we're all a family under one sky, right? We're all connected. There's always that guy, or there's always that officer that's just very, very funny and dry. And I just think there's something really beautiful about that. But also just the diversity in terms of, it's taught me a lot about, we talk a lot within programs about one size fits all. And it goes back to that co-production piece in terms of every cultural project we do is different, whether you're in England in a different category, a different, population, whatever it is, we have different things happening. And again, the culture that's outside is a reflection of the culture inside sometimes. So learning more about that, Serbia's been fascinating. Last week, when I did some work over there in terms of just the way in which they make sense of, incarceration, but also post penal care. I just learned so much from that diversity. This idea, like Rebel Ideas is all about just flood it with diversity, and hopefully we'll come up with some more kind of grounded and stable solutions, really. So yeah, I learned so much. I learned so much from going abroad, and it's terrifying sometimes. I mean, we trained 180 leaders in the Middle East around rehab culture. It was really scary. It was not scary because they were scary, but scary because I was so out of my comfort zone. But it's just really interesting, isn't it, that when you present something, you've got to think about what the audience, how is it going to land? How can you make this meaningful for the people in front of you? Keeps you on your toes, which I love. I just love that. It's just a great challenge. It's an opportunity to be curious, isn't it? I mean, that's fab.
But again, it's so interesting that you talk about going to different countries and looking for difference, but you actually find something universal. And that one of the things that is striking you is that we're all human under one sky, which is a lovely phrase. And so you can come away with both differences. Maybe some people think a bit more out of the box, but you're finding the same human problems and the same human solutions, the same human spirit and nature. And
I think when we talk about relationships, we do, we do a lot of training around our model of relationships, which is about people being distant psychologically, people being too close, and people being in this space where we thrive, which is, I guess, that green space. And no matter where I do it, no matter where I train it, people just get it. People just get that when we step back within a prison and we disengage, we feel less, we see less. And then with that has an impact on our well-being and our self-compassion and all that kind of stuff. And when we get too close, we can't sleep. We can't switch off. We can't, we're trying to get too involved with things that aren't our job. Everyone feels those things. So relationships connect us, don't they? Those conversations that say, the summer school last year in Barcelona, we had 17 different countries with different practitioners from prison, and you do the relationship model and they're all like, that's exactly how I feel. And like, that's because we are relational beings. And prison isn't all that different. When you strip it all back, it's still an oppressive system that hurts us, So,
do the connections between the people that you bring together, do they continue over time? Do you hear about the kind of the broader ripple effects of bringing together people from these different countries sort of after you've finished the work that you've done with them?
Yeah, very much so. So we stay in touch. We've got the kind of Growth Alliance, which is basically just people that we've worked with along the way, and our commitment to those working who are in prison when we meet them, and those that work on our projects, is that we have lifelong membership. You have lifelong membership to growth, this growth kind of family. So that's engineering belonging, right? Like, no matter what you do, if you commit another offence or you relapse, it doesn't matter. You're always unconditionally loved and cared for, and we will be there and we will support you and your family or your loved ones or your significant others or whoever. So we get a lot, and the beauty of that network and that connection is that I think we need to make that more formalized, because I think that's the secret to it in terms of how we can refuel. It's not about me refueling everyone, it's about people refueling each other, isn't it? And creating a space to enable that. But it's just so wonderful. You know, we got a guy called David Hayes who I met in a prison, and now he's on his 11th world record. He does charity events for Mind. He's an adventurer, a paddleboarder, and he's just wonderful. You know, like you just think, wow. I remember meeting you, and we just, you know, we had not a lot of conversations, but we talked about meaning and what brings you meaning, and just those kind of conversations that you don't always maybe have in prison. So it's lovely to suddenly, you know, when he gets an award or he gets another world record, he sends me a message and says, "Oh, Sarah, I got another award," and you're just like, "Oh, it's amazing." So yeah, without that, you know, without that connection, you don't ever get to hear of all the wonderful things that can happen, and obviously all the tragic things as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's lovely to connect with people and connect people up. You know, we've done that a lot. When you've got people that are doing the same kind of mission, you know, got some stuff over in England around IPPs it's all about restorative justice. And I met an amazing guy in Spain who successfully applied that to kind of institutional abuse. So connected them up, and that just makes me feel, something's going to happen. Yeah. So it's just glorious, isn't it?
Yeah, it is fantastic. And what it must take, I mean, what keeps you going? Where do you go when things get tough? How do you look after yourself as well as others while you're doing this challenging work? Like this, even listening to you describe it, I mean, it makes my heart sing in a way, but instantly it also makes me think, wow, this is demanding.
Yeah, it's demanding. I've come a long way. So I mean, I came away from university, and got fibromyalgia and ME. So I had a quite significant kind of shock, I guess, in terms of my body doing one thing and my brain doing something else, and that real frustration of like, I want to do more, but my body's basically keeping the score on this one, and I can't get out of bed, or I can't cope. So you know, it's been a real journey since that was 10 years ago. But I think that is the collateral damage of a lot of stuff. And I have to manage it, because if I don't manage it, then it does kick me in the face, to be honest. So I think there's just something about in-house, we do so much around well-being. We have supervision internally. I have supervision externally with a number of people. I've got lots of mentors that help me with lots of different challenges that I face. I hate business stuff. I love prison stuff. So helps me with just dealing with business rubbish. But I think there's just something, you know, I do a lot of meditation now. I do a lot around my diet now. I walk in nature now, a lot more. My place, though, I guess when it gets, when it used to be, when it got bad, I would go, but now I go just out of a routine and say I deserve this. But Norway has just got something about the place, and I appreciate. It's like classic people exceptionalism. It's not all great. I appreciate it isn't all great, but there is something about my relationship with Norway that the minute I hit that runway and that plane goes down, I am in a different place and I am at peace. And I see Arne, who's my dear friend who used to be the governor of Bastoy, who's a psychotherapist. So spend some time just walking with him, making sense of stuff. My other friend Rolf, who was a prison officer at Bastoy. So yeah, reconnecting, getting in nature, Norway.
Yeah, I want to put myself on your walking list one of these days, so we have to go for a walk.
Absolutely, that would be delicious.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it also sounds a bit like the community the spirit of the community that you're developing. It isn't one way. It's very much mutual, and that there's a lot of reciprocal support going on. So you're finding people who get it and they give it back as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's that is not the expectation that they give it back, but that's how we always set it up. It wasn't like you're broken, you need fixing, you need to be mentored. It was like, we're in this together. How are we going to work together as equals? So it's never been the case that, you know, even in little things, you know, I messaged a guy the other day and said, look, I'm not going to be able to chat tonight. I'm just having a bit of a bad day. And he's like, is there anything I can do? Are you okay? And then the following days, you know, how are you feeling today? And it's just like, I would do that for him and he would do that for me. And that's we set it up that way. We've always set it up that way. I've never known their offences unless I'm employing them or need to know, I guess, but I don't need to know that. I just need to know, you know, their skills, their talents, their characters, their, you know, what are they struggling with, what they need. And yeah, like anyone else.
Yeah. And I like to think you're almost kind of living in your own growth community, or
Yeah.
some of the time at least.
Yeah, that's it.
fantastic.
So, you know, family, last year we did a family fun day. So we had people from Hungary and the US who work with us internationally, but also, you know, guys that have been part of our, you know, part of our lives, part of our work. They bring their families. We had food together. And it was just brilliant. It was just brilliant. It's just yeah, we just all have this shared vision. So we have this network that's really helpful, but also a really brutal. I mean, my advisors for Justice 2.0, I think I kind of reeled off all the stuff we did last year and was kind of hoping they'd be like, that's amazing, you've achieved so much.
Yeah.
And they were just like, you've done too much. What are you doing? Like, where's your pace? What are you thinking?
Yeah.
Like, silly. But so yeah, they're really honest, but that's because they're just their orientation is they care deeply for us as a organization and individually. So yeah, very grateful for that. Keep me in check.
Just before you come in, I know there's a sort of final question I was going to ask, but I just wanted to pick up on a word that you use, which you don't hear often in these conversations, which was unconditional love. That's how you sort of describe, and I just wanted to just kind of touch on that in terms of what that means for this network, that you're using that word, that word is sort of part of how you describe this. It's a very human word, but one we don't often hear in these sorts of environments. I just wanted to come back on you about that.
Yeah, it links into, I guess, the books, you know, what books, what podcasts, all that kind of stuff. But so Carl Rogers on Becoming a Person, I just picked it up in a Waterstones, I don't know, a long early career, early doors. And it was a game changer. It was a game changer. And he talks about obviously humanism and he talks about unconditional positive regard. And it's hard, you know, that is hard, particularly when things don't go to plan, right? And your first reaction is maybe like, you know, just anger or feeling betrayed or, you know, all of these kind of things. We give so much and sometimes people aren't in a space to receive that. And that's really hard. But do you know what? I wouldn't have any other way. And we're very overt about our love for people. I still remember in a prison, so one of the guys living there just shouted out, "Love you, sir, see you tomorrow." And I was like, "Love you, see ya." And this officer said, "You can't say that." I said, "I love you too." I love you so much. And then I was just like, "Come on, do you want to cuddle? Do you want a hug or something?" And then obviously he started laughing. And by the end of it, we were dear friends and he'd hug me and he'd tell me he loved me and I'd tell him I loved him. And I think love is rare. Being tactile with each other obviously is very rare because obviously there's so much risk around it. But I think there's some, you know, sometimes when you just like, you know, people say, "I haven't had a hug for 10 years. I haven't had a hug for 10 years." And I just felt like a human, you know. So I think there's just things that demonstrate that we are human and we are equal. And that's the stuff, telling people I love them, end of every conversation. Every New Year's Eve, every Christmas Day, whatever it is, we just send out a message and it's just, yeah, it's just our cultural habit. So yeah, it's I think it's important.
Yeah. And so our last question is, what are your top recommendations that people interested in building a human justice system must read? So a book, a poem, an article, a must listen to podcast, a TED talk, TV program, all of the above.
It's really difficult. And the reason is just in the last 10 years, I have gone a little bit underground. So mainly because I've just gone down into like, right, we're just getting into the ground and we're doing stuff on Becoming a Person. Carl Rogers, I always say that is really important. I love Brené Brown and all the work she does on shame and vulnerability. We talk a lot about that. Turning the Ship Around, which is a kind of a leadership book, which is all about empowerment. So it's about a submarine captain who turned the ship around. But it's a really lovely book that talks about moving the decision making to the right people and that, you know, that kind of power. There's not a lot within criminology, really. Some of the stuff around kind of co-production is great. But again, I just I don't know, I've just become a little bit more less maybe trying to find the answers from other people, and more so about I'm just going to work with the people I've got in front of me to kind of co-create this reality in the here and now. So yeah, there's loads of books. Price of Inequality was a book that was really influential for me. Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, again a real classic kind of popular book, but it's just really practical. It's a really good one to talk about. But
and you've got your own podcast as well, haven't you, with the growth
Growth
as well. Give them a plug, Sarah.
Growth Uncut. And that's all about the whole thing about Justice 2.0 is it's co-owned, so everyone's got their own upgrade idea really, so how we can get those voices out there. But yeah, I think I gain a lot of my knowledge now from the people that are around me, I think. And that just helps me to sometimes I just go into a bit of a rabbit hole, I think, like previously, and maybe have struggled with my relationship with academia since maybe getting burnt in it, which is ironic considering I work in prisons. But I don't know.
It's a fantastic answer, and I think the work you're doing is amazing. Is there anything that we haven't asked you about? Is there anything we haven't touched on that you think an important area or a message to other people who are trying to do something similar before we end? We've nearly used our time.
Yeah, I think there's just something about, I think a lot of people are kind of struggling in silence, isn't it? And I think there's just something about, like, we talk a lot about kind of Margaret Mead saying, never underestimate the power of like-minded people, to change the world, because they're the ones that do. And for me, there's just something about, it can be a really lonely journey, particularly leadership. And I imagine even lonelier the further you go up the top. And so for me, it's just about creating spaces where you can connect. Don't believe that that's a luxury, like that's a luxury thing, that if things are struggling, create those spaces and test out that vulnerability, because it's a measure of courage, as Brené Brown says. But I think just connecting, like connecting with us at GTB, but just finding your tribe, isn't it? Because it's a really tough gig. A lot of people talk about shelf life with this work. And
I think that's why your advisory group, or the people who are trying to say to you, don't go crazy, it's because we want you to carry on, and you have to be able to, you don't want to burn out or overdo it. And that question is a really important question, I think, for all of us. Like, where do you focus, and then where do you take a breath, and where do you find the courage and the support for continuing? These are really good questions.
And how can you design it away, right? Like, I don't know. We're so used to having the heroes right at the top that are driving it all. And I think, I think it's about the idea, isn't it? It's about, that's what a movement does. The person who led the Me Too movement, not a lot of people know that individual, but we all know the Me Too movement. And I think there's just something about sharing that, because I want it to last past me, right? I want it to keep generating things and impact. But I think that whole piece, the shelf life piece, is really difficult. It's a really tough one. Keeping people passionate and hopeful, isn't it?
Yes.
Otherwise they burn out. No hope is no good.
You're so right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate talking. Nina, anything you want to say?
No, just to share my thanks as well. And I think, the people listening to this who've, have seen you at the event and then sort of sparked an interest, will have got so much from this conversation. And I noted down something you said earlier, which was, we are human, we are all humans. How can we come together as humans? I think really encapsulates what this work, The Future is Human, is trying to do. And I loved your, the words like energy and magic and hope and there was so much there, and so many pockets of the future that you've seen in your sort of broad work across the world that we can sort of take that hope for. And I think some really practical things that you're doing to connect people together, to take people out of their spaces, to give people that space to be creative, to co-produce ideas together, to think differently, to take that inspiration and then take it back to their countries, but but underneath it all, that sort of love and connection and humanness, yeah, which was beautiful. So yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. And I hope, yeah, people listening to this, you know, tell us what you think about, you know, this idea of growth and human flourishing, where it's, you know, where you're seeing this, you know, do you talk about love in your work? You know, where does that come up? Where's the sort of humanness, you know, that you're, you know, those moments of humanness that Sarah described, you know, have you got similar experiences? You know, do get in touch and let us know. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, Sarah, and yeah, amazing work, and yeah, look forward
Thanks
to
so
seeing
much.
it grow.
Yeah. Pardon the pun. Yeah, thanks so much.
Absolutely,
It's been
absolutely.
wonderful.
Thank
It's been
you.
wonderful, and I will see you both hopefully soon, and
Yes.
hopefully in person. But yeah, been
Yes.
lovely. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah.
All the
Take care,
best.
Sarah.
Talk again
Take
soon.
care.
Yeah.
Bye.